webinar where we're looking at issues in science communication, research and publishing. So we've got a good turnout of both guests and speakers. A few people are still arriving as we go, so I might talk slowly to begin with so that everybody's in the room by the time the speakers begin. So, I mean, we wanted to just look broadly at some of the issues that are coming up that I know lots of us talk about. Well, we would talk about over coffee, but we chat about at the end of meetings, you know, things coming up about how on earth we get published and what we publish during these unusual times. So hopefully we'll get the chance to explore these questions. We've got 5 really significant speakers who will help us work our way through some of these. Just on the practical details, everybody in the audience, I'm afraid, is muted just for practical reasons, but if you have any questions, which I'm sure you will, please type them in the chat and we'll work our way through either the best of those or all of those, depending on how many there are. We've asked each of the speakers to prepare sort of 5 to 6 minutes at the beginning, just flagging up, I guess, what they see as the key issues right now and ahead of us in publishing in science communication research. So we've got with us today, we've got Hans-Peter Peters, who's the editor of the Public Understanding of Science journal. We've got Louisa Masserani, who is co-editor of the JCOM special edition on COVID-19, which I believe is out right now, if anyone hasn't seen it. We've got Annabella Carvalho, who is the associate editor of Frontiers in Science and Environmental Communications. John Besley, who is a member of the editorial advisory board for the journal Science Communication, also associate editor of Risk Analysis, and Sandy Oliver, who is co-editor of Research for All. So, and before we begin, I want to say thank you to you all for doing those jobs, because they are jobs that I have spent and continue to spend a lot of time actively avoiding, because they're a lot of work and it's really important work for the field. So thank you first of all. And I'm going to begin handing over to Hans Peters from the Public Understanding of Science journal.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to this webinar and for the opportunity to explain a little about our journal. I'm the editor of Public Understanding of Science since a little more than 1 year, and I still consider myself a novice in this role, struggling to define and fully assume this role. However, we have a great editorial team that supports me. Susan Howard, as managing editor, has more than 10 years of experience in this role, and those who have submitted manuscripts to POS or worked as reviewer for us will certainly recognize her name, as she does most of the communication with authors and reviewers. Then we have Brian Trench as book review editor. You all may know him as you are members of PCST network. Jean-Baptiste Gouillon is our historical moments editor, and Christina Riguto. She is also attending the seminar. She's our social media editor who operates our Twitter account and blog. Let me first briefly explain how we process and evaluate submitted manuscripts. We use a 2-step decision procedure. First, if a manuscript does not fit to our journal scope, or if we detect obvious format issues or quality problems, we make a desk rejection, usually within 2 weeks after we have received the manuscript. This initial screening saves reviewers the time to review manuscripts that have no chance of acceptance, and it saves authors the time waiting for a foreseeable rejection. Then manuscripts that have survived this initial screening are passed on to usually 2 reviewers. Based on the reviews and our own assessment of the manuscript, we make a decision about the manuscript. Usually the decision is either reject or asking for a minor or major revision. That means that authors usually have to revise their manuscripts and then resubmit them, which in the case of major revisions is then sent to reviewers again. we use 3 criteria, and I'm thinking a lot of the criteria of acceptance, and I think we use 3 criteria in our final decision about a manuscript. The first is the quality of research. What that exactly means depends on the kind of research, whether it is theoretical, qualitative, quantitative, or historical. So it's something like the research design and methods, whether there is a clear research goal, whether the connection to a field of theory or a research tradition is done and is convincing. That's quality of research. The second criterion is quality of the manuscript. Is there a coherent structure? Is a methodological approach made transparent? And especially important for us as interdisciplinary journal, is it the manuscript comprehensible for readers outside the narrow scientific community of the author? That is a big issue for our journal, but probably also for other journals in our field. And the third criterion is relevance with respect to our scope. There are many aspects to the question of relevance. So it has to do with novelty, with significant progress, with the interest of our community in the topics, in the generalizability beyond the singular case, a singular country, or a singular issue. Something like that relates to the question of relevance. And more specifically, we assess relevance relative to our journal scope. And the core of our journal scope is the interrelationship between science and the public. And that brings me to my last point, namely our interest in corona-related articles. We are very interested in corona crisis-related manuscripts. However, we are considering only those manuscripts for publication which meet our scope. Some authors seem to assume that all corona-related studies that deal with risk management and population responses are automatically relevant for public understanding of science. But this is not the case. We have rejected some submissions to public understanding of science because they did not fit in our scope. As I've tried to outline in my editorial published in the July issue of Public Understanding of Science, we consider articles for publication that focus in the corona crisis on the public role of science and scientists, the use of scientific medical knowledge in public communication, comprehension and processing of that knowledge by the audience, construction of expertise, attacks on science and scientific expertise, or use of scientific expertise in public decision-making, and topics like those. So there are numerous topics, and we are really looking forward to such submissions. I will simply stop here and wait for questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks. That's really clear and helpful. I think we'll get lots of questions, and you may be getting lots of submissions now. Louisa, would you like to go next? And I think you've got some slides. So while you're doing that, I'll just remind the audience, if any questions that you've got specifically for Hans-Peter or generally, feel free to type them into the chat as we go along, so you don't have to keep remembering it. Here we go.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for all of you, depending on which part of the world you are. So it's my pleasure to present here our special issue on COVID and science communication, the special issue that we organized for JCOM, the Journal of Science Communication. And so the general context you know well, there is a massive production of scientific papers on COVID. And just to give you an idea, a quick search at Scopus today showed that more than 30,000 articles were produced in less than 1 year. And this figure is even more shocking or astonishing when you compare with other diseases that are have been killing for decades in other parts of the world. So meanwhile, some people can argue that too quick research has been produced. More than 43 million people were reached worldwide with the disease, and unfortunately more than 1 million deaths around the world, and many of them here in my country, Brazil. So keep research or not, it has been literally a matter of living and dying. And science communication has been the heart of the whole discussion, both in the sense of shaping or creating or stimulating attitudes and behaviors, which are now the main tool that we have against the disease, against the virus, but also the whole discussion about fake news, misinformation, etc. And so because of that, we decided to do a call for papers on COVID and science communication. So going to the main question that people raise is, yeah, it's free for publishing and it's free access. The editor of JCon is Emma Aitkamp, but this special issue was tailored and launched and organized with 3 people. So myself, Padraig Murphy from Ireland, and Rod Lamberts from Australia, which has been very exciting because it's 3 people from 3 different parts of the world. And so in terms of submission, we had 133 papers submitted from 40 countries around the world, which is very exciting. Just to put you give you some comparison, it was more or less the same number of papers that we received for regular issues in JCon. And so all the papers were submitted to the peer review process, meaning that more than 200 people were involved in this process. So we really thank these people who helped us. And so our main question when we launched the special issue was, will people write actually research papers in such short notice? And so we thought that maybe we would receive more comments or letters or essay, but in fact, an important number of the papers were research papers, and written, many of them by researchers in science and technology studies / science communication studies, and some active scientists. So this is we had 25 papers approved, and so we decided to split into two issues. The first one was actually published in the beginning of this month with some of these papers, and so to give you an idea in terms of impact, in terms of statistics, we see that there is a search for this kind of paper. And so in terms of subjects, it's a lot of different aspects, including social media and cartoons and this discussion about chloroquine and etc. And so some final remarks for this part of my presentation. So it has been very exciting to hear voices from different parts of the world. The virus is the same, but the impact is totally different according to the country and the region. And I thought we observed an important focus on social media. We observed a diversity of methodologies and approaches. Clearly, there was a creativity in searching a specific angle approach for each paper. And so, but we had similar challenges in carrying out methodologies. For example, those people who are working with newspapers, we have a massive amount of stories being published. So we should deal in a different way with the data, but also different stories to tell according to different regions, countries, and cultures. And so the second part of the special issue is now in the oven, it's almost ready. And so we will publish it in the beginning of December. So again, I invite you to visit our special issue and the whole journal. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you, Luisa. I'm going to introduce next then Annabella Carvalho, who's Associate Editor in Frontiers in Science and Environmental Communications.
Hi, hello everyone. First, let me say it's a great pleasure to be here and be able to talk about these issues together with such distinguished colleagues. I will be saying a little bit about Frontiers and its special characteristics in terms of article publication. These are open access journals. All of Frontier's journals are open access. They have some distinctive features, namely an interactive review process, which means that as the reviews come in and the handling editors open the interactive review forum, authors are able to respond to the comments in an interactive process with the 2 or 3 possibly reviewers, and this process goes on until the reviewers consider that they are satisfied with the revisions, and finally they have to endorse the paper so that it can be published. Frontiers really requires a minimum of 2 endorsements by 2 reviewers for a paper to be published. So this is quite interesting and challenging at the same time. Another distinctive feature is the fact that there is an identification of the reviewers and of the handling editor on the published manuscript. Their names are upfront on the first page of the published article. This is a way of somehow acknowledging the contribution of these people, these scholars, to the process of improving and finalizing the research. And I think it's quite it's a quite interesting manner of really valuing this work. At the same time, it can pose some difficulties because we have a series of different typologies of articles, and this is another distinctive feature. Namely, we have perspective articles, opinion articles, policy and practice review articles, etc., etc. And all of those are peer-reviewed, but at the same time, because often they involve a degree of positioning yourself in relation to a topic, some reviewers may find it a little bit troubling to endorse a given paper. So there's dilemmas here. We want to openly acknowledge and involve all the scholars that are scholars and others that are involved in the review process, but with some typologies of articles, it might be a little bit tricky. I have to say that we are a very big team. We are now 18 associate editors, and the editor is Tarla Wright-Peterson from the University of Texas, El Paso. We publish both on science communication and on environmental communication, and of course on papers that cross the 2 fields. And we've seen a very big rise in the number of submitted and published papers since 2017, when the journal appeared. It's quite a young journal still, but the number of papers was now published in 2020 was 49. We're still 2 months to go, so that says something about the level of interest that the journal has had. We also have 27 special research topics now published or open, with calls open currently. This is the journal's equivalent to special issues because it's an open access journal, and there's the idea of issues. It's an open access and of course online only journal. So the notion of issues doesn't quite apply to this journal. The articles are published as they get ready, but Frontiers has this label of special research topics to designate particular calls around particular topics. for instance, we have now 2 open calls on COVID. One with the title Science in a Time of Crisis, Communication, Engagement, and Lived Experience of the COVID-19 Pandemic. And another one titled Evidence-Based Science Communication in the COVID-19 Era. We can't say yet how much interest and how much, what the level of submissions will be, but we're looking forward to welcoming those contributions on that topic. The journal has had a significant impact if we measure it in terms of views, for instance. That's another aspect that Frontiers is very keen on promoting, which is letting authors and indeed everyone know how many times each paper was viewed. We have some special research topics that have over 100,000 views, for instance, on water, energy, and food nexus, on citizen seismology, etc. Most articles have over 10,000 views. There's some that have over 30,000. These are quite telling numbers, I think. We were also asked to say something about our hopes and concerns for the journal. So I'm just going to say briefly that in terms of hopes, we really expect that Frontiers in Science and Environmental Communication can be a space for collaborations across disciplines. One interesting aspect is that special research topics can appear in different journals. So say in science and environmental communication, in marine science, for instance, or in psychology, or if there are cross-cutting themes, the special research topics can join 2, 3, sometimes more journals, and authors can choose which journal to submit their papers to. It's different pathways into the same special research topic. And that has given rise to some interesting collaborations and to some interesting also hybrids and dialogues between disciplines. Another aspect that we are fomenting are opportunities for collaborations between researchers and practitioners. We have those categories that I mentioned, such as policy and practice review, that are really quite a quite interesting space for practitioners and others and possibly with academics to discuss a particular topic or a particular experience with science and environmental communication. We have very interesting examples of this.
Lovely.
In terms of concerns,
we need to. Is this your last point? Because we're running out. I'm conscious of time for questions. So one last point, if that's okay.
Yeah, my last point, just in terms of concerns, it's just 30 seconds. Frontiers aims for a very quick turnaround. This is obviously positive, but it means that sometimes it's difficult to get reviewers to accept to do the job. The time frame and also the interactive review forum is demanding, and this has been quite demanding in terms of for the editors as well, in terms of finding appropriate reviewers. But we keep on trying and aiming for a good job. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great. We're getting loads of questions now, so I'm trying to be conscious that we leave enough time for the audience to take part in as best they can. So John, you're next. I think you've got a slideshow for us as well.
Yes, it looks like it's not like saying that someone else, is someone else sharing right now? No. It's saying that only one participant can share at a time. Oh, I would like to share a screen. There we go. Cool. Thank you so much for letting me join you, and I appreciate seeing everybody who I'm used to seeing at various parts of the world. I feel, I guess everyone's missing, everyone's seeing everyone. I'm in a sort of a double role today. So I'm the associate editor for risk communication for risk analysis, but I also am on the editorial board and do a number of reviews. for science communication. So I'm doing both, and I've spoken with Susanna Priest, wishes she could be with us from ScienceComm, but she's on the west coast of the US, and it's quite early there right now. So I'll just say off the front end, so I think most folks know science communication, and everything Hans-Peter Peter said about the process is the same, I think, for both of these journals. The review criteria, really, they're very similar. With science communication, I suppose the one additional criteria is, whereas the scope for public understanding of science would be public and science. For us, for ScienceComm, really the emphasis on the communication. Risk analysis is a bit of a funnier one, and I'm not sure everyone's as familiar with it. I find that US scholars that I interact with will sort of alternate between risk analysis, ScienceComm, public understanding of science. But the European, outside of the US, the folks that I see through the Society for Risk Analysis, which publishes the journal, tend to be a different group of people. They're working on similar questions, even have similar sort of trajectories in the discussions around dialogue and public engagement, but they just tend to be, it's just a different group of people often. They both have reasonable impact factors. They both are getting a number of submissions. Susanna said this year's submissions are up quite a bit from last year. They're already now at the level where they were at the end of last year. I haven't noticed that with risk analysis. It looks like we're pretty similar to previous years. Risk analysis publishes monthly, and so there's acceptance rates a little higher. So Susanna said about 4 to 6 weeks for a first decision, but I think for ScienceComm that's sort of her editorial decision on whether or not to send it out for review. Risk analysis there, we work quite hard on getting it quickly, and I'll say something about that in a minute. But usually we're in the we try to stay within 2 months, so sometimes we're quite a bit faster. And then both journals are publishing from all around the world. I think Hans-Peter Peters said something about this, but in terms of when we're looking at the manuscripts, when I'm looking at manuscripts, both as a reviewer and as an associate editor, the first thing that I'm really concerned about is, does it say something that's going to be of interest to a broad range of people? Often, I just rejected one this week that looked like it was very well technically done, but it was a project report. There wasn't any attempt to speak to what the results that they had found meant for the bigger picture. And often theories, getting into theory and testing or building theories, one sort of metric or indicator of that's trying to do that sort of thing. But I would say generally that's probably one of the biggest desk reject reasons, is it's just not trying to say anything that would be of broad interest, and that's sort of kind of key. The other thing for me, and so depending on what I'm doing for risk science communication, if it's not about communication, if it's not about the production of communication effects, something about content, it just doesn't work for us. For risk analysis, it's a little bit trickier because we also have it's a very multidisciplinary journal. I think on that first slide we said maybe about a third to a quarter of articles deal with communication, but we also have quite a bit of risk perception research. And so sometimes I'll say, well, this isn't communication. It might be better handled by one of my colleagues who focuses on risk perception. Though often the link between risk perception and communication is I think it's a bit of a, it's whoever's turn it is to get that article will come our way. But often we're looking to see, does it say something about communication? It can't just be, here's what people think about X. Here's why people feel this. Here's what people are scared of. I'll just say just as a minor, I don't know where this fits in, but I want to make sure I say it, is when we're looking at these manuscripts, we sort of go through, we're making these decisions about whether it's useful. I can't tell you enough how many times I have to write back to authors or provide reviews that their graphics just aren't understandable. At the end of the day, the APA guidelines are that graphics have to be understandable on their own as much as possible. You can't, if you look at a graphic and it doesn't make sense just by looking at the graphic, there's probably, and those things matter so much. And actually all of the sort of how articles look, all those sort of, you would think they would be heuristic cues, but they're being taken into account. And just in terms of content, the effort that we can put into making better graphics, I think is going to make a huge difference, both on the degree to which your articles get cited, used, and also, for me, I find it when I'm writing, it's a great way of focusing me on what it is I really want to say. In terms of looking forward, when I took on, I think I've been doing the associate editor for risk communication now for a couple of years, risk analysis for risk communication for a couple of years. And the thing I'm most excited about, and still hoping to find, is so I work a lot with the science communication trainer community in the US, and they're eager for guidance on how to communicate better, how to communicate more effectively. I'm eager to find journal articles that help to say, you know, do this, not that. Think about this, not that. Looking for those applied articles that are still theoretical, that still have a great methods and great data, but that are saying something to a practitioner, that might say something to practitioners. I'm so eager for those papers. If I can find those papers, I'm super happy. And I think we were talking about things we're going to talk about. So this question of review time, as an author, I'm very conscious of it. As an editor, I try to be very conscious of it. But I'm also of the mind that, well, this is one of those self-inflicted wounds that academics do to ourselves. We complain about it, but at the end of the day, the thing that makes reviews go faster is people like us finishing our reviews on time and saying yes when you're asked to do a review. And so I can't emphasize enough that we're desperate. We're always, you know, I don't know if it's harder. I mean, I've only been doing it for a couple of years now, but I got to send out a lot of emails to get 2-3 reviewers. And people who are, and often, you know, it's an interesting thing because you start to see, I don't see a lot of people being really mean reviewers, but I see a lot of people who don't review, who either, or they say that worse, they say they're going to review and then they don't review, or they take 6 months. But people who are publishing, and it's just, so I think there's this sort of, it'd be nice if we got paid for reviews, lots of things that would be nice, but this is the system we have. And so we need colleagues like all of you who I know personally, the ones I know, they're all wonderful people. And I'm not actually, I suspect the kind of people who would be on this call are the kind of people who do their reviews. But we need this normative pressure, this effort to get our colleagues to, if we want reviews to go faster, we got to do the reviews faster. And I'll stop there. We'll stop sharing.
Right. Thank you very much. And we can talk a bit more about that in the questions. We're getting great questions coming up around open access, interdisciplinarity, who's publishing, collaboration with practitioners. So there's lots of things to talk about. But before that, we've got one final speaker. We've got Sandy Oliver, who's the co-editor of Research for All. We can see your screen, Sandy, but we can't hear you speak.
Sorry about that. Took me a long time to find the unmute button. So thank you very much, Melanie, and thank you everybody for letting me join you. I feel slightly the interloper because Research for All is much younger than the other journals and also has a much more broader scope rather than being focused specifically on science communication. So it's an open access journal that's published twice a year about research engagement across the whole academic enterprise. So it brings together academics and their publics across disciplines, not just science communication. It's free to read and free to write for, and that's because it's sponsored by my university, University College London, and by the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement. This means that we can get a broad range of authors. So I guess most of our papers are by academics, but a large number are also co-authored or sometimes written without academics. And these other authors come from NGOs, from theatre, local television, commercial enterprises, the NHS in the UK, museums, government, businesses, absolutely loads of people writing about how they engage with research and the difference it makes to what research is done and how it's used. So we publish different sorts of papers. We have landscape features that will cover a broad area, that we can have very specific practice case studies. We can have the more conventional research articles, and then fewer of them, but we also have commentaries, sometimes very personal pieces about who or what inspired my thinking, and occasionally reviews of publications and resources. So the landscape articles and then also the editorials that build on the papers that are submitted are really curating a field. So thinking about the field across the whole of academia and potential partners with academics is a new field in that scope, very extensive landscape. So our editorials have built on the contributions from authors to discuss topical issues and different ways of thinking about the field, looking about what motivates people to do this sort of work, about sharing different ways of knowing, what conditions are conducive to this sort of work really thriving, what blind spots we can have, and what emergent learning comes from working together. And the most recent editorial related to engagement in the time of great change and inequalities as a nod to COVID. So our editorial criteria are quite broad, and we do look first at is the piece in scope, but then because our main aim is to share learning across such a wide field, it's very important to look at whether the piece is accessible to a variety of readers, both inside and outside of academia, and whether the language has been, any specific language has been explained clearly, and whether the piece is the right length. But the really key issue, which is sometimes the most difficult, is, does the piece represent new learning? And are the authors able to reflect on the learning that comes out of it and summarize it effectively? And although academics are used to doing that because it's part of what's expected, this isn't the same for practitioners or communities. So sometimes we work with them. If what they send is showing promise, then it's worth investing, working alongside them. So one of the things they find quite often most difficult is distinguishing what's their personal learning and what's our personal learning from what is new learning to the whole field. And so academics do this by setting their research into the bigger picture by comparing it with existing academic writing. But it's possible for practitioners to do this as well by setting what they're doing in the bigger picture of how so common practices across networks and major programs, or the professional codes of conduct or established training, looking at the norms within their practice and seeing how theirs stands out. And authors can also look at how ideas stand out from community norms that might come from mass media, social media, or civil society organizations' websites or publications, or even we get a lot as well at arts and humanities looking at heritage and traditions. And then authors can show their innovation by building on earlier articles or editorials, show how they're taking ideas from one discipline, network, community to another, or from research outwards or from outwards into research. And as I said before, the accessible language is absolutely key for sharing these different papers. So we welcome contributions from anyone who works in engaged research, and particularly encourage co-created pieces, academics and their collaborators working together. So I think that's my time up already. I can't believe it's gone so fast. Thank you.
Lovely, and thank you for being so prompt. That was very helpful. So we've got lots and lots of questions coming in the chat. Keep going if you've got a burning question to ask. We can also, one thing just to flag up is that both John and Louisa have answered some questions in the chat, so I won't repeat those, but people might want to scroll back and just keep an eye on. So there's a parallel discussion going on there, challenging my ability to multitask. So a few questions. Last week, if anyone follows me on Twitter, I tweeted about this workshop and asked people on Twitter to submit questions. I didn't get a massive response, but there were 1 or 2 questions, and 1 or 2 of them have also been flagged up in the chat here. So I might begin with one of those, which is, Claire has flagged it up here, and Michelle previously raised it with me. There's a question about who is publishing and submitting papers during COVID, and is this an issue? So have people seen an upturn in submissions? I know that Louisa said she has. Is that gendered? So the suspicion is that this is people without caring responsibilities that are able to be writing while other people are busy keeping life together. And also Brian Trench raised an interesting point in the chat, is this that people have shifted focus to work on COVID, or do you think this is, I mean, you're not going to be able to tell us, but do you suspect this is additional effort, that people are doing additional work on this topic? So what do people, I mean, Louisa, do you want to begin? Because I think you've answered some of that on the chat.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of gender, we did try to look at this in our special issue. And the problem is that we don't ask about gender to the people. So the way that we had to evaluate it was looking at the names and see whether they are supposed to be man and woman. It was not a self-attributed gender, which obviously makes all the difference today. And but in terms of names, we saw that women submitted less than men. It was 80, almost 90 people, authors who submitted were men. Against the rest was women. So yes, there was more men submitting as the man author for our special issue. So in terms of the second thing, what Brian mentioned, so we don't know. I mean, I can make some considerations, including with my own case. We didn't shift we were closet in home, trying to, in a very crazy moment. And so what I think is that people wanted to think about COVID, and they put a lot of energy in doing something positive in a crazy world, in a lot of negative things are in the general context. So they put a lot of energy trying to produce something interesting about this crazy situation. And so whether they shift the subject is another question that we don't know to answer. In my own case, we are doing a lot of research in COVID, but we didn't give up of the other areas of research. We are kind of reshaped, because we work with science communication anyway. So we reshaped some of the things, but I'm sure that we are going back to other topics later. So the answer is we don't know, Brian, but I think that's it's more like in the way that I was sharing. Thank you.
Thanks. And I guess on the first point about gender, it's difficult to answer that question unless you know what the makeup is like in a normal edition. So there may just be more male authors submitting. I mean, do any of the other editors want to comment on that question about who's publishing during COVID? Hans-Peter? You're silent. You need to unmute yourself. We're not learning anything, are we?
Sorry. Yeah, we do not have a statistic about the gender relation, either in the normal nor in the COVID-19 related submissions. But we have an increase in submissions, which is not in the first place due to COVID-19 related papers. That's quite interesting. So there can be different interpretations or different hypotheses. One is people do not go to conferences, so they have more time to work on it. And on the other hand, we have a decrease in accepting reviews. So we have, on one hand, if there is more time, this would explain the rise of number of submissions. On the other hand, it would not explain a decrease in readiness to take over review requests. And so maybe there is some psychological mechanism that people have the impression, okay, we have another big crisis and we need the things done that are on our desk. Some kind of end of time thinking approaching. I don't know. Yeah, but we do have a significant increase in submissions, and we do not know whether the gender relation has changed, which would be an interesting question. And we have a lack, like John said, a lack of reviewers, and this is a severe problem for us too, to find enough reviewers who are giving the review on time. We have an editorial.
Go, carry on, sorry.
No, just we have an editorial about reviewers in the next issue, and I think this is really something we need to advance and to make sure that this is accepted as part of the scientist role.
Thanks. And John, were you signalling you wanted to add or just supporting that point?
That was a thumbs up in support. Yeah, no, everything Hans-Peter said is.
Yeah. And I think John is typing some interesting thoughts about reviewers and the challenge of that in the chat. So that's worth reading, I think. So there's a number of questions that I'm going to try and roll into one so that you can sort of take whichever bits you want from this. There's questions. So I think it was Alex has raised a question about open access and how a number of funding bodies are now requiring that if you're funded by them, you have to publish in an open access journal, or at least one which is a transition journal. So you know, what do those who are not open access or transition journals think about that, and how is that going to work for them? On the other hand, I mean, I think Louisa and I have recently had a challenge with some work which wasn't funded, and we wanted to publish it quickly, so paid for open access journals were just off the table for us, and we were going through the journal lists just crossing off ones that we couldn't even consider submitting to. So perhaps those who've got open access journals might want to say something about how we tackle that challenge for both funded, and we have to accept in science communication lots of our research is not funded, but also if we want to publish practice-based research, how people without huge grants would access open access journals. But also there's a couple of questions as well about the kind of promise and challenge of preprint service, which I'm not aware is widely used in this field, but the scientists that I interact with certainly use those extensively. So, you know, kind of the tension between open access and paying, open access, not open access and grant funders, and then this question of preprints. What do people, any comments about that? Perhaps Annabella, do you want to say something to begin with an open access journal?
Sure. So Frontiers does charge for publication. However, we agreed that for our journal, and I assume the principle is also valid in others, whoever declares that they do not have funding for that purpose to pay the fee, nor that their university is involved in the consortium with Frontiers that allows the staff or the members of that university to publish, because this is another model that they've been trying to develop, is to have a sort of agreement, a sort of subscription service that allows authors of given universities to publish for free. If you're not in that status, you will be exempted from the fee. You just have to state it. And that is often the case, obviously, in social and human sciences. They want to expand these areas. That was the condition for us to move forward with this project, and it has been working so far.
Great. And I mean, those who've got open access journals, so I'm thinking Sandy and Louisa, you were talking about JCOM, it was free to read and free to publish in. How is that being funded, and is that sustainable?
Sandy wants to start, maybe? I can start, it's only because... Should I start or...
Carry on.
Okay. So the way that JCON succeed in doing that is because JCON is published by an organization which actually has funds for publishing other topics in physics, or I can't remember exactly. So they publish many other journals, and they have funds for that. And JCON is like a part of it, and as it is less expensive and much more, I mean, so it's possible to keep free for publishing and free for reading. And JCON does another thing which is very interesting, which is to allow people who doesn't write well in English. You can submit in some language, for example, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, I think French, and so you can submit in your own language, and then the JCON pays the translation. So it's really it's a paradise. But of course it was possible because they have funds from for the other journals.
Okay, and is it the same at UCL Press, Sandy?
When I started the journal, I was only interested in starting one that was both free to read and free to write for. And my head of faculty was happy to let us have a small budget to support that. And nobody's yet taken it away. And we are, we're also supported by the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement, who see it as part of their mission to support the journal. So, and at the moment, University College London is doing a lot to advance free open access. So I hope that we can continue. It isn't guaranteed, but I feel that it's part of the fundamental principle of research for all, that it's free on both sides. And in fact, if it wasn't, we wouldn't be able to share the sorts of knowledge we do share across the whole field.
Great, thanks. So how about the paid for journals? John or Hans-Peter?
I can.
I mean, because I've got mixed views on this. I'm not an advocate of one side or another.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the advantages and disadvantages. It's a problem for authors who do not have the funding for paying the fees. And this, for me, is a very strong argument, because I know several colleagues for whom this would be a problem to publish in a public understanding of science if they had to pay 2,200 or something like that dollars or pounds or so. Yeah. On the other hand, I must say, access to papers is not that difficult, even if you do not have access to the journal via your institution. You can register and have 3 months a year access to the full archive of SAGE. I mailed this this link that you can use to register. I mean, several of our, or many, increasingly, the papers are open access because the authors pay, or even there are contracts with organizations in the country. So every author belonging to one of these institutions automatically is open access in SAGE journals. This is an increasingly payment model. So we have a mixed journal. We can have articles open access, and we also have articles that are funded according to the normal model. Yeah? And in the end, I mean, if somebody really wants to read an article, we have research gates. There are all means of contacting the authors. And when I started 40 years ago in my field, there were these cards to ask for a reprint of articles. This worked quite well. And I mean, now we have the electronic equivalent of that. So in the end, there is access for anybody who is really interested and makes the effort to get an article. This is not the same as simply clicking an article and having it as PDF. That's quite clear, yeah.
But how will the pressure from the Plan S proposals, which would mean that if you know, any of us funded by European funds wouldn't be able to submit to PUS, I guess?
I mean, if they have project funding, this usually includes a kind of budget for paying the open access fees.
Yeah, I'm just, yeah, John, were you?
Sure, yeah, I mean, again, I agree with Hans-Peter on most things. One of the nice things I think that risk analysis is able to do is sometimes when an issue comes along, we can we'll work with the society that it's based around, which is a nice thing, is able to come up with funds to work with the publisher to at least temporarily make a set of articles, sort of a curated set of articles, publicly available. And I just, to add a point I made in the chat, though, also I think open access is great, and I do it when I have articles that I think are going to be of relevance to practitioners, especially. But there's also a whole other range of things that researchers can do to make sure that their data or their results, their studies, are being used by the broader community. So it's not just open access is just one tool we can use. But I think the broader question is, how do we make sure that our research is getting out to the people who might actually use it? And then, of course, that hopefully that puts more onus on us to actually do research that people could use.
And were there, I mean, so yeah, are there any more comments about preprint service? Does anyone I mean, I guess we're asking the wrong people about preprints. Is, you know, do we want to circumvent the traditional journals? Has anyone got experience on the panel of publishing via or after a preprint service? And what's your journal's views on publishing papers that have been on preprint places?
We do not have any, we do not prohibit this publishing via preprint servers. We ask authors to tell us when they submit their article. But in COVID-19 related papers, we explicitly said this is acceptable to us. But if somebody inquires, I do not think that we would say, no, this is a problem when you submit your manuscript later.
That's helpful, that's good.
As long as the citation, the ultimate citation, comes back to the journal eventually.
Yeah,
that's the metric we're living in.
Yeah, great. Okay. It seems that we're supposed to run for 1 hour until 1 o'clock, so we're basically out of time. What I was going to ask is if the audience could maybe turn on their cameras so that we can do an applause and say hi in person. Have it, you know, this is the bugbear of all teachers at the moment, is teaching to a room of black dots. Faces are coming on. Of course, if somebody's naked, don't. You never know what situations, it's different times of the world. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I think that's been a really interesting panel, and I think it's opened more questions than it's closed. But thank you to all of the editors, and thank you very much to all of the participants who've put the questions, and well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we can go and have lunch, tea, dinner, whatever it is at this time of day.
Bye-bye.